Yeah, thanks so much, Tim. Thanks for that intro. Thanks for having me back. Always a pleasure to speak to you. Always a pleasure to talk about Genetic Signatures, Australian company that designs, develops tests for infectious diseases, which we manufacture here in Australia and sell around the world. Our tests are a molecular test, and all that means is that it's a test that detects the genetic information of the organism. So that's the DNA or the RNA of the organism that makes us sick. So is a molecular test, but we have developed a technology over the last 15 years, which we call 3-base, which gives us an advantage over other molecular suppliers in that we can more easily detect groups of organisms from the one patient sample. So our 3-base technology goes into kits that we make, which are listed there on the right-hand side of the slide, where each kit is able to detect a large number of organisms from the one patient samples. So our enteric kit, for example, this is gastroenteritis, or I guess viewers might know it as food poisoning or similar. That can be caused by many targets. Our kit can detect over 20 of those effectively in the one test, from the single, and test for them simultaneously from the one patient sample. So these are sort of syndromic panels. We look for organisms that cause disease in certain conditions, such as gastro-respiratory, which includes influenza and SARS-CoV-2, the organism that causes COVID-19. We have tests for ESBL, or antibiotic resistance, sexually transmitted infections, etc. And we are now marketing these kits around the world in our expanding team. In fact, our team has almost doubled just over the last couple of years as we pursue expansion from Australia into Europe and North America. So the next slide will give you a visual of what our kits look like. The kits contain everything that the lab needs to perform the test. And when I say lab, I'm talking about a pathology service provider. These are either hospital labs or dedicated labs that take patient samples and look for the presence of an infectious disease. So everything's included. The business model for our listeners today is quite simple. We make these test kits usually in lots of 500. We receive purchase orders from our customers, we fill them, we're paid on standard 30-day terms. We don't do any testing here, we simply make the test kits. The pathology lab will use our test kits on any sample that comes through the door, any patient specimen, and this could be thousands a day. And they get reimbursed either through government reimbursement programs and sometimes even private payers. We've also developed instrumentation. Although our tests are platform agnostic, they work on equipment that is commonly in labs, but we have developed equipment which has a very desirable workflow for the end lab, and it's really targeted towards those mid and high throughput laboratories, those who are doing hundreds, if not thousands, of tests every day. It has been a busy 12 months for us, given that COVID-19 commenced about a year ago, and the gold standard test is a molecular test, one that directly detects the RNA. So the next slide will take you through our last 12 months, which has been extremely busy for us. Not even 12 months ago, back in March of 2020, we announced first shipments and regulatory submission for our COVID-19 test kit. It detects the virus SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19. We received those regulatory approvals in April, both in Europe and Australia. In June, we're included in the ASX All Odds Index. In June, we recorded quarterly revenue, which was up 351% on the prior corresponding period. Only to outdo that in the September quarter, which was up 585% on the prior period. And again, only to outdo that in the December quarter, where we're up 744% on the prior period. We have a breadth of tests, as you saw. We continue to develop our other tests, non-COVID tests. And just last month, we received a CE-IVD clearance, or CE-IVD mark, for our STI genital pathogen detection kit. In terms of revenue breakdown, that's on the next slide, where I'm showing you 4.5 years. So the final column there is the first half of FY21, where the other 4 are just the full years. And you can see that large uptick in revenue. It's really from that strong demand for our tests. In first half of 21, we've had multiple waves in Australia, but also in Europe and America, where we are now active. We have installed multiple new units across all the jurisdictions that we're active in. And that's Australia, Europe, and the US. And these instrument placements go into busy labs, and primarily at the moment during the pandemic, they're being used for SARS-CoV-2 testing. Although we fully expect and focus now on converting those customers into using the rest of the kits that we have regulatory approvals for and use exactly the same workflow. We've reported the last two quarters were positive cash quarters. We have a cash balance of 36 million, which really allows us to aggressively chase the offshore expansion in those much larger European and US markets. So for the rest of the time, I'll just spend a minute or two on each of the jurisdictions where we're active in. The next slide will take you through Asia Pacific. We are an Australian company. We have been selling tests in Australia for longer than anywhere else in the world. So it is the majority of our revenue. First half 21 was just over 15 million, up from 2.5 million in the period prior corresponding period. I mentioned back in March of 20, we did receive TGA registration for our SARS-CoV-2 detection kit. We're quite quick in developing that kit and getting the regulatory approval, and that has really underpinned the strong growth that we have seen, not only for that organism in particular, but also the entire respiratory portfolio had an uplift as our customers were choosing to look for other organisms that may cause respiratory symptoms, such as influenza or rhinovirus. We are an Australian manufacturer, and we have significantly increased production capacity over the last 12 months, and there is more to come. And as I've said, we are continuing to develop our new test kits for different syndromes, such as the STI, sexually transmitted infection kit, which we have lodged with the TGA. The next slide will take you through our European business. It is a focus for us, has been for the last 12 months. Again, we were in a position where we were able to get CE-IVD approval relatively quickly. That was March of 20. My apologies, that date is wrong on the slide. And that led to sales in Europe of 3 million for the first half, compared to only 100,000 in the 12 months prior. Europe is now representing 16% of our global revenue. And to me, that's just the beginning, given that Europe and the US are multiples of the Australian business, where we are now well and truly established. We are choosing customers strategically. We are targeting those customers that have mid to high throughput, and those customers that would benefit from bringing on more of our tests as the pandemic becomes under control. As I said, we have recently announced only last month that we did receive CE-IVD registration for our STI genital pathogen kit as an example of how we continue to develop and bring new kits to market. The next slide is on our US business. It is certainly focused on building our US business, as North America is the biggest molecular market in the world. Over 40% of the global molecular market is the US. And we were therefore delighted in only about 8 weeks ago to announce our first customer in the US using our SARS-CoV-2 test. And even more delighted only 3 weeks after that to announce that we'd acquired another customer. Those that know me know I always say the first customer is always the hardest in any new region, and we've done that now in North America. Contributed 600,000 in the half, bearing in mind that we only brought them on in December. Continuing on with clinical trials for our enteric protozoan kit, which is the kit which can look for protozoan infections causing gastro, and that's going to go through full 510K FDA submission. We've appointed a Canadian distributor and established a new warehouse in Los Angeles, non-stop flight from Sydney. The next slide really is just to remind you of the breadth of products that Genetic Signatures makes, whether it's enteric, respiratory, STI, and you can see on this slide the significant addressable market for each of those. And excitingly, some of those are still emerging markets, such as the antibiotic resistant test. They are estimating that there'll be more deaths from antibiotic resistance than cancer by the year 2050. So the really, I think, potential for these to turn into very significant markets for us. So in conclusion, I will just, on the next slide, just take you through our focus looking forward. I think I've shown you now there are multiple growth opportunities for us to pursue. Our focus is on winning those long-term customer contracts, delighting them so they'll take on more of our assays as they can, if they haven't already, as the pandemic winds down. But we're certainly leveraging that COVID-19 momentum. We are promoting the new tests that we have coming through, and we are actively bringing new tests to market, either through FDA submissions for protozoan kits, for our STI genital flavivirus, and some kits that we have not yet announced to the market. So I'll pause there, Tim. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, John. A truly fascinating business. Now, there's a theme here in terms of questions. Obviously, there was a kind of a COVID tailwind with your COVID testing kit that the company was innovative enough to have released quickly to the market. So there's a question here, you know, basically post, there's a vaccine in the market, how will that impact your COVID-related kit sales? And can you kind of balance out a potential fall in those sales with the new kit, the new testing kits that you have for other diseases?
Yeah, no, it's something that we're actually very focused on, Tim, we do understand the pandemic won't be forever, and that's a very good thing. We do understand that testing isn't going to go away even post-vaccine. You mentioned the vaccine. There's certainly flu vaccines. You're encouraged to get them every year, but we do have a flu season every year because for multiple reasons. The first is they're not all 100% effective. And so if someone's displaying symptoms, you have to do a test. And there are many different organisms that will give you the same symptoms. I described in the presentation, whether it's local or international, that the new customers that we have on are being encouraged to take on those new kits that we have or existing kits that already have regulatory approval. So why test for only SARS-CoV-2? We could also test for influenza or RSV or any other number of respiratory organisms. And that is very, very important, especially if you're the poor patient who has symptoms and is told they have a negative COVID test. It doesn't make them feel any better, but telling them they have the common cold generally does.
And what's your kind of forecast annual sales growth for this year?
We haven't released those forecasts because it is obviously in the middle of a pandemic. It's very difficult to know what's happening week to week. We are of the view now that this is not going away anytime soon. I think there's another couple of years left of strong demand for COVID-2 testing, and I think that will then evolve into SARS-CoV-2 becoming just one test of many that are being done on any clinical sample, of which we're very well prepared for, and I'm certainly excited to see where we get to.
And could you give a little bit more colour, if you can? This question here on you know, when do you expect the FDA? I know you can't give any timeframes, but when do you expect the FDA to allow the sale of the kind of non-COVID tests in the US?
So before we can, the FDA can consider this, we need to finish the clinical trials that's being performed in 3 US-based sites. We have had delay because of COVID-19. The test sites which were identified before the pandemic obviously were swamped, and we had to push those trials. We are recommencing those trials now. Some sites are better able than others. Some are still swamped. So we're not able yet to give any indication. By the time we finish the trial, write up the application to the FDA, it should be within a quarter after submitting that we hear back.
And is that a separate application process for each individual kit?
It is in the US, correct. Every kit is a separate FDA application. Slightly different in Australia and Europe, where you sort of have a banner for respiratory kits or STI kits, and you can add kits under that same banner.